Blacks built America. This is a claim you will often hear. And you'll often hear it presented without qualification, which automatically makes it a lie. Presented without qualification or elaboration. They'll just say, blacks built America, where America was built on the backs of black slaves. Well, okay, what parts of America? How much of America? Because blacks were never more than, 20-40% of the population at one point. So obviously they didn't build all of America. There were always whites doing all sorts of productive things all over America, even farming. Maybe if you're talking about cotton or tobacco, you can fairly say that blacks built that section of the economy, or their labor substantially contributed to that section of the economy. But if you're talking about wheat, no, you're wrong. White family farmers farmed America's food, on the whole. Not with black slaves. And if you're talking about other stuff like industry, the case is even more overwhelming in the opposite direction. But they say blacks built America. Right? This is a standard leftist technique of deception, the heaping of undue praise. They always try to build up the little people with the heaping of undue praise. And there are two principal reasons for this. To build up their sense of entitlement, and to build up their sense of grievance that entitlement isn't being catered to. So, you build up the little people to fuel their sense of grievance and entitlement, so you can agitate them against the majority, against the, bulk of the population. The heaping of undue praise is also, it's an insult to the people who that praise is due, because it automatically minimizes their contributions. To say that blacks built America automatically minimizes the contributions of whites. There may be some contributions you can credit blacks with, but to just offer that without qualification or elaboration is automatically to minimalize, to marginalize, and to ignore the tremendous and overwhelming contributions of whites to building America. So what part of America did blacks build? Well, they built part of the South. That's true enough. But the South was burned down in the war to set blacks free from slavery. Didn't recover economically for 100 years. And it was rebuilt after slavery, meaning not with slave labor. So to say that black slave labor built America is pretty close to being absolutely false. At most, it ever built part of America. Part of a part. And that part was burned down and rebuilt without slave labor. Some of which may have been black too, but it was paid. So this is all just part of the grievance and entitlement mongering, where they're trying to stoke a sense of entitlement, stoke a sense of grievance, in order to inflame and to agitate people to fight for what's supposedly theirs but actually isn't. What they had no hand in creating, or little hand in creating. And these narratives go a lot further. If you kick around in certain parts of the internet, you'll see the black invention narrative, where they give you lists of inventions that blacks supposedly made, the street signal, street light, whatever, traffic light. And they'll have whole lists. This is almost a meme at this point. It is a meme. But if you look at these lists and you start Googling some of these inventions, or some of these names, you always find examples of these things being introduced earlier by someone else. Alright, it's never original contributions. But some of them go further. Even further than that. They'll claim Mozart or Isaac Newton or other historical figures, European historical figures, as black and their contributions. Or they'll say that white slave owners patented the inventions of their black slaves. Which all of this is utterly incredible. Utterly incredible. But, you know, to hear some of these people tell it, and some of them will tell you explicitly, you know, if you get into it with them, which I don't recommend because it's totally pointless and a waste of time, you know, they'll tell you explicitly that whites never created anything. That everything whites have was stolen. Which is utter nonsense. You know, 97% of the human accomplishments since 500 BC have come out of a relatively small number of Western cultures. So, you know, this whole narrative, which has kind of a popular form, an official form, and like unofficially even goes way beyond that, is only an attempt to justify a sense of entitlement and grievance, and to justify taking back, you know, what isn't theirs and what never was theirs, which really just amounts to taking. And you can really see this right now over in South Africa. You know, this sense of grievance and entitlement gone wild. Now, South African history and politics is fairly complex. I don't want to get into all of it here, because it would take a while to untangle. You'd have to start from the beginning. And there's a lot of stuff that's gone on. There's a lot of legitimate beef between different groups over there. There have been a lot of genuine conflicts over resources and power and various other things. But, you know, one example you can use is Orania. Orania is an Afrikaner town, basically, that was founded on, you know, Afrikaner principles as a town for Afrikaner people of the Afrikaner culture. And it's protected under the South African Constitution as an example of, you know, legitimate self-determination, which is guaranteed to all the peoples of South Africa in their constitution. It was bought and paid for fair and square. It started out, I believe, as a worker housing project for a dam construction. And after the dam was complete, you know, the housing went dormant. It was, you know, just kind of sitting around getting overgrown. And it was bought by these Afrikaners to create their little Afrikaner town. And it's out in the Karoo, which is a desert region that has never been inhabited by South Africa's blacks. So, there's no controversy here. There's no issue. You know, there's no colonial history, there's no land seizure, there's no nothing. Okay, there's absolutely no historical precedent for saying that this isn't theirs. And by the way, you know, the original housing project was much smaller than the current town of Orania, so they've built it up. They've built it up, and they have a policy of building it up with Afrikaner labor. Not with black labor, but with Afrikaner labor. So it's totally theirs. It's totally uncontroversial. There is no historical case you can make against this. And yet, if you go on black Twitter, black South African Twitter, you know, they're screaming for the appropriation of Orania without compensation. Or they're wailing about the injustice of Orania existing as an Afrikaner town. Even though they bought it, they paid for it, they built it up. It's totally theirs. There can be no possible legitimate controversy about that. So, you know, this idea that their presence is fundamentally illegitimate, this is not based on historical facts or historical narratives. This is ideology. It's race hatred. It's nothing more. And these broader narratives on this theme that have focused down onto Orania really reveal their bankruptcy, because there's no applicability whatsoever to Orania. Alright, but understand that these double standards, you know, because they whine about Afrikaners having an Afrikaner town in Africa, even though Africans have never inhabited that region. They whine about it and they demand it, claiming they have some kind of historical right to it. But meanwhile, millions of black Africans are flooding into Europe. Right? So it's a total double standard. And realize that these double standards are going to be applied against you no matter what. If you're white, you're always going to be on the short end of these narratives, of these double standards, of these impossible moral traps that have been constructed. You know, there's no way to argue with these people, because they're never going to take your side. They're never going to concede you anything. They're never going to admit that anything you have is legitimately yours. You're the only one who's ever going to take your side. You and people like you. That's it. And that's what you have to realize about all these narratives. All these narratives are designed to justify taking what's yours, are designed to justify disinheriting, disenfranchising, displacing you. Designed to justify taking everything that's yours. You know, that's the only purpose that these narratives serve, whether it's, you know, blacks built America, or Afrikaners took land from Africans. You know, whatever the narrative is, first of all, it's either exaggerated or fabricated in most cases. And second of all, you know, within the logic of this narrative, if you can call it that, it's not really logic, it's pure emotion. You know, but within the context established by this narrative, you are not allowed to legitimately have anything. You're not even allowed to exist. You know, and if they say go back to Europe, that doesn't mean shit, because Europe isn't yours either. You know, and they have all these anti-colonial and anti-imperial narratives. Well, these apply to every European country, whether they had anything to do with colonialism or imperialism. You know, Ireland was on the receiving end of colonialism. Ireland was governed by a genocidal European colonial power for centuries, which killed over half their population. Now they're doing better than Great Britain. So what does that say about colonialism? You know, it's not obviously not what makes you rich, you know, because a lot of the countries that are doing the best in Europe or have the highest human development index or satisfaction or happiness or whatever, however you want to measure it, even GDP, you know, it's not the colonial powers that are at the top of the scale on any of those measures. And yet these narratives apply to every European country. Ireland's supposed to get 1 million immigrants and refugees over the next couple decades. This is a country of like 1 million people. So, you know, you have to recognize the utter bankruptcy of all of these narratives. You have to recognize their intent. You have to recognize their endpoint of their logic, which is that you're not allowed to legitimately own or possess or have anything, and you're not even allowed to exist. That's what all of these mean, and that's all they mean. And that's why they're all worth rejecting.